this decree has raised some perplexities about the specific existence of the pastoral care for migrants. The establishment of a section for refugees and migrants within the dicastery, and the de facto but not de jure existence of the work of the maritime apostolate, which is not mentioned in the statutes of the dicastery. This gap in the legislation has been filled by the Praedicate Evangelium, which in Article 166 as well shall see, mentions the work of maritime apostolate placed under the direction and no longer under the senior management of the dicastery. Migrants in the statutes of the dicastery for the service of integral human development. Article 1, under the name of the dicastery, outlines its nature and aims, and in this way focuses attention as far as the subjects that interest us here are concerned, on 4 categories: those forced to leave their homeland, those without a homeland, refugees, and migrants. These last 2 categories were originally placed in a specific section established ad tempus under the direct authority of the Holy Father Francis. The statute was approved ad experimentum. It was promulgated by publication in L'Osservatore Romano and then published in the Acta Apostolicae Sedis, entering into force on the 1st of January 2016. It does not appear that a new statute has been approved or that the time for approval at the experimentum has expired, nor that it has been extended, since the legislator did not indicate a deadline to the one approved in 2016 on an experimental basis. Migrants in the new Constitution, Praedicate Evangelium. In this Constitution, migrants, referred to by various names, appear in 3 articles. In Article 163, paragraph 1, in the context of human promotion and the dignity of the person, it is specified that the dicastery, in addition to other issues, deals with migration. The text uses an abstract term here compared to the statute's specifications, which indicated 4 categories of people. In Article 165, paragraph 4, compared to the previous Article 163, paragraph 1, it is once again specified in the context of material and spiritual assistance who the recipients are: migrants, refugees, displaced persons, and other subjects of human mobility in need of specific pastoral care. This is the first time the focus on specific pastoral care has returned. The already known categories of migrants and refugees are joined by displaced people and other subjects not further identified. Article 170, in a context of cooperation both ad intra and ad extra, assigns the dicastery on the one hand the analysis of the major causes of migration with a view to their removal, and on the other hand the drafting and adoption of specific regulatory protocols. In addition to migrants, Article 117 mentions 2 other specific categories previously absent: refugees and asylum seekers. The section of the ministry which deals specifically with refugees and migrants issues is no longer mentioned in the Constitution, Praedicate Evangelium. It is a reality that migrants are at the heart of evangelization. But In the context of the more general problem that has seen a certain uniformity in the naming of the different types of dicastery, as we noted yesterday, one can raise both the terminological question of the name of the dicastery and its nature. This new dicastery is a sort of recollection of many other pontifical councils. Doctrine has noted that the change of denomination, and among other things as observed, with the abolition of the distinction between congregation and pontifical councils, the difference between executive bodies of government and bodies of pastoral promotion also falls away. This is the main question of the unique new denomination, dicastery. Migrants and specific pastoral work. The Church, in fulfilling its mission, addresses people in their concrete situation and therefore considers the needs that arise for the pastoral care of the faithful from that situation. In a particular way, such attention is paid to migrants, as the juridical pastoral ordinance of the Instruction Erga Migrantes Caritas Christi of John Paul II Pope very appropriately specifies, given their particular living conditions, which require pastors to extend to them the same pastoral care due to their native subjects. Finally, when the situation calls for it, for example, when the number of migrants from the same ethnic group of language is substantial, the churches of departure and arrival are called to collaborate to facilitate effective and appropriate pastoral care. The specificity of the pastoral care to be ensured to migrants is based on a careful assessment of the circumstances in which they find themselves. But one cannot disregard the general principle expressed in the Con-stitution Exul Familia, according to which the spiritual care of foreigners, whether permanent or transient, is to be ensured in a form proportionate to their needs and no less effective than that enjoyed by the other faithful in their diocese. The migrant situation involves a fundamental and legitimate need of the faithful, since it directly calls into question his relationship with God. The equality of all the faithful and the right of each one to approach God according to his or her own humanity and diversity are manifested in the right duty to be welcomed by the particular church, the implementation of which is an inescapable and radical requirement for the church that is born, is shaped and grows in relation to communion. No less important is the right duty to non-discriminatory ecclesial insertion and participation, whereby being part of a particular church which has in itself the universal and Catholic dimension, requires baptism as a requisite. And finally, for every migrant, it becomes necessary, in order to make the insertion of his diversity into the continuity of the particular church ever more complete and visible, to enjoy the right to specific pastoral care. Pastoral care for migrants is by its very nature extraordinary and provisional, precisely because it is specific and due to the fact that ordinary pastoral care is insufficient and completely lacking. Ordinary pastoral care, with which the Church provides for all its faithful, is implemented in the parish community through the parish priest. Pastoral care of migrants cannot and must not be alternative or autonomous to the pastoral care of parishioners by the parish priest, who is responsible for all the faithful living in the parish territory, nor must it limit itself to the indispensable, sufficient, and equal minimum for all, but rather provide abundantly and adequately for spiritual needs, always bearing in mind both the end to which these means are directed and for which they were instituted by Christ, and the particular and specific circumstances of people's lives. Migrants simultaneously belonging to the particular church and to the ethnic community within it might seem as anomaly. In reality, it means on the church's part the need to bend the structures to the service of souls. In particular, it means respect for the migrants and for his insertion, even if gradual, in the territorial parish community. Consequently, the structures that adapt to a specific migratory pastoral are nothing but the expression of the material solicitude that the church shows toward the faithful, so that they do not make the migrants feel a stranger to the particular church in which he or she lives. So the migrants and refugees are considered so important that Pope Francis instituted a specific section in the dicastery for the human progress. And in Article 1, Paragraph 4 of the statute of this dicastery for the service of integral human development specifies that a section of the dicastery is specifically concerned with matters concerning refugees and migrants. This section was placed at tempus under the guidance of the Supreme Pontiff, who exercises it in the manner of he deems appropriate. With the publication of the new Constitution on Roman Curia, Praedicate Evangelium, there is no mention of this section in the text of the Constitution. And in fact, in an internal undated communication, the dicastery informed that as of the 1st of January 2023, a complete integration of the section into the new structure of the dicastery will take place. This integration is necessary for an integrated and integral approach and for the interconnection of human mobility with ecology, economy, health, and safety. It is desirable that integrated approaches and interconnections do not make one lose sight of the salus animarum to which every actio vere pastoralis must tend. A second reflection is about maritime personnel. In the statute of the dicastery, with the foundation of this new dicastery, as we can imagine, the Pontifical Council for the Pastoral Care of Migrants and Itinerant People formally no longer exists, and with it, the competence over seafarers with the attached work maritime apostolate has also disappeared. This competence does not even appear in the motu proprio establishing the new dicastery. It is true that the work for maritime apostolate is present in the motu proprio Stella Maris, an apostolic constitution by John Paul II. It was only mentioned there in that motu proprio, which was issued not only to update the regulations prior to the 1983 Code of Canon Law, but also to draw the Church's attention to a reality that risked being neglected. This risk deserves to be borne in mind even today, especially when one considers that the difficulties of seafarers and the apostolate on their behalf have increased, especially for seafarers and fishermen on the high seas, whose stay in ports has become increasingly shorter, and the transfer of chaplains for visits on board ships is increasingly limited, if not impossible. The Praedicate Evangelium only once in Article 166, paragraph 1, mention the complex reality of seafarers and their pastoral care through the work maritime apostolate. In terms of terminology, the Constitution mentions only one category, seafarers, both in ports and at sea. It is useful to keep in mind here the more complete and precise terminological variety proposed by the motu proprio Stella Maris. Finally, there is a vexata question concerning the direction of the dicastery exercise over the work for maritime apostolate, a direction that in Pastor Bonus' Con-stitution was qualified as suprema moderatio, high direction. My aim in this reflection is to relocate the discourse on seafarers and people of the sea in the original context of the pastoral care owed to them, and within the framework of specific legislation that protects their canonical constitution framework. With the establishment of the dicastery for the service of integral human development, which merged along with others, the Pontifical Council, as just noted, was suppressed. And with it, we assisted to the suppression of the work of the apostleship of the sea, of whose existence there is no trace except in Stella Maris. And recently, the existence of the work of maritime apostolate has recovered in the new Praedicate Evangelium Constitution, recovered because in an earlier draft, the maritimis ne verbum quidem, the absence would have led to the persistence of two types of issues. One of constitutional law, whereby only the motu proprio Stella Maris remains the apostolate of the sea, and the other of an ecclesial nature, which invites us to emphasize that as for other categories of migrants, the Church must also be able to provide pastoral care for seafarers organized around a specific regulatory framework. This is also indispensable because pastoral care for the maritime world is addressed to all seafarers. Seafarers, fishermen, industrial and traditional, those who work on oil rigs, pensioners, students at nautical institutes, and those who work in ports. This pastoral ministry also considers families and currently extends its activities to the crew and passengers of cruise ships and yachts. In the Constitution Pastor Bonus by John Paul II, maritime people had a special place, and migrants too. In Article 150, paragraph 2, Pastor Bonus' Constitution spoke of seafarers both at sea and in ports. In the preparatory phase of the Second Vatican Council, the outline Precipue de Animarum Cura Questiones already contained the chapter De Maritimorum Cura, seu de Opera Apostolatus Maris. The Constitution, Pastor Bon, reserved an autonomous space for seafarers, both at sea and in port. As has been rightly observed in doctrine, the Pontifical Council's intervention in this area is subsidiary and of service to the local churches. While on the one hand, the use of the adverb pariter and the verb fovet at the beginning of the Article 150, paragraph 2, places the activity in favor of seafarers with that described above. On the other hand, it suggests that it is not its own activity. In fact, the type of pastoral care referred to belongs to the particular churches, not to the Pontifical Council. The question is nowadays actual. What's the nature and the mission of this dicastery? Promoting culture, studying, or organized pastoral activities? Because the change of the name from Pontifical Council to dicastery is also change of nature and mission of the dicastery. On the other hand, a particularity is highlighted. The Pontifical Council's involvement with the local churches does not seem to be immediate, but through the work of the Apostleship of the See. In fact, the Apostleship of the See has its own organization and therefore enjoys a certain autonomy. It is therefore normal that the Pontifical Council acts through the work of the Apostleship of the See. This, however, having its own organization above the individual dioceses and the individual bishops' conferences, is under the high direction of the Pontifical Council itself. The adjective high, introduced to qualify the direction, is intended to mean that the work already has its own internal direction, which the Pontifical Council itself must respect. But what is the work of the Apostleship of the See? Historically, it emerges as an international association of the faithful with the purpose of fostering the spiritual, moral, and social life of seafarers. The Constitutional Ex Familia speaks of it for the first time and specifies its purpose, especially the spiritual and moral assistance. The expression Apostolatus Maritimi Opera and its definition can be found in the Article 1 of the Motu Proprio Stella Maris. The Maritime Apostolate Opera, while not constituting a canonical institute with its own juridical personality, is the institution that promotes the specific pastoral care addressed to the people of the sea and aims to support the commitment of the faithful called to bear witness in this environment with their Christian life. First, it is useful to note that Article 1 says that the work of Maritime is not an autonomous canonical body with its own legal personality. So, what is it? The Motu Proprio does not say. And it cannot be said because historically it was a concrete activity that did not come under the Holy See, but which the latter recognized and approved. It was a concrete institution created by the faithful under the responsibility of the local ordinaries. Today, it is no longer a work as a concrete institution, but a concept with no point of reference other than what the Motu Proprio himself creates. In this way, the work is understood not as an organized concrete activity, but as the legal framework, freed from a concrete institution, a common regulation of apostolic activities and initiatives. both institutional and non-institutional, that arise at the level of the universal and particular church, with the aim of ensuring the pastoral and spiritual care of those who in different capacities live and work in the maritime way. The work of maritime in the pastor bonus. Another question concerns the placement of this work within the Article 150, paragraph 2 of pastor bonus. As mentioned, this article determined the task of the Holy See through the Pontifical Council for the pastoral care of migrants and itinerant people, for the phenomena of human mobility in general, and for the apostolate of the See in particular. It was up to the mentioned Pontifical Council to express and foster pastoral solicitude for seafarers in the local churches. This solicitude was of the same Pontifical Council as for the other phenomena of human mobility, and was exercised in the same way. The Pontifical Council fostered this care for seafarers, especially through the work for maritime apostleship. The adverb especially does not imply that care for seafarers is to be implemented necessarily or exclusively through the work. And here again, the question of the meaning to be attributed to this work returns. It was always referred to a concrete reality, such as the work of maritime apostleship. Had such concrete work not existed, it would not have been mentioned in the pastor bonus. In other words, the motu proprio Stella Maris took note of the existence of such a work, but did not intend to create the work of maritime apostleship. What about the Suprema Moderatio? The same Article 150 of Pastor Bonus specifies that the Pontifical Council for the pastoral care of migrants and itinerant people exercise Suprema Moderatio over the work for maritime apostleship. What is it, and what meaning is to be attributed to this Suprema Moderatio, high direction? The work for maritime apostleship was not born within the Holy See, nor was it ever made its own by the Holy See. The Holy See approved it and had supreme moderatio over it. It is the same supreme direction that the then consistorial congregation had, which then passed to the Pontifical Council for the migrants and itinerant people. But once the Pontifical Council was suppressed and the work was no longer mentioned in the statutes of the new dicastery for integral human development, it only exists de facto, and the Holy See no longer has any supreme moderatio over it. Commenting on this expression, it has been observed that it was introduced to qualify the direction, meaning that the work already has its own internal direction, with which the Pontifical Council itself must respect. Praedicate Evangelium Con-stitution, compared to the founding statute of the mentioned work for the maritime apostleship, has reclaimed the forgotten work, but no longer contains the specification that gives the work for maritime apostleship senior management over the same work, settling for mere management. The expulsion of the adjective suprema, high, from the text of the Praedicate Evangelium prompted the dicastery for the service of integral human development to ask the dicastery for a clarification. This clarification of June 27, 2022 responds to two questions. The first concerns the autonomous nature of the work for maritime apostolate. The second concerns the legal consequences of the direction that the dicastery is called upon to exercise over the work for maritime apostolate. The strengthening by the healthy decentralization that inspired the new Praedicate Evangelium Con-stitution, and to make it explicit that the directorate entails the acts referred to in article of motu proprio Stella Maris. It is only worth mentioning here that on April 28, 1993, when asked by the Secretary of State about the legal nature of this work for maritime apostolate, the then Pontifical Council for the Authentic Interpretation of Legislative Texts replied that this work has its own autonomy, although not absolute and completely independent. Toward a specific statute for the work of maritime apostleship. As already pointed out, at present, the juridical canonical statute of the work for maritimes no longer has its own reference norms due to the creation of a new dicastery into which the Pontifical Council for the Pastoral Care of Migrants and Itinerant People has also merged with the abrogation of articles of Pastor Bonus concerning maritimes and migrants, and also due to the absence of references to the work in the statute of the new dicastery. As a matter of fact, the work for maritimes continues to be present within the new dicastery, but without its own statute to guarantee the universal constitutional framework that can also become a reference for all the works of the maritime apostolate operating at the level of episcopal conferences. Considering what has been argued so far, I suggest a sort of transitional statute with a view to a future stable and new motu proprio that would update the current one, Stella Maris, and also reconfigure within it the nature and competencies of the work for maritimes. This configuration with work of maritime apostolate's own legal personality was also assumed by the mentioned reply of the Dicastery for Legislative Text of June 2022. As with the other phenomena contemplated in human mobility, the phenomenon of seafarers and people of the sea also deserve all the pastoral attention the Church is capable of, so that the most adequate provision can be made to ensure the exercise of duties and rights toward seafarers. In this respect, the apostolate of the sea must also be considered both in the context of the fundamental duties and rights of the faithful and in the specific context that it cannot be achieved by ordinary common pastoral care and therefore requires specialized pastoral care. The juridical organization of the apostleship of the sea is not only a way to provide legal cover for apostolic initiatives aimed at seafarers so that the activities are well ordered, but constitutes a juridical obligation in the canonical sphere that the Church has toward specific groups of faithful, such as those belonging to the seafarers. Brief conclusion. In the more general context of a unitary structural vision of the phenomenon of human mobility, it is useful to stress that the accentuation and centrality of the papal magisterium, which has placed migrants in general back at the heart of evangelization, is not matched by a unified and unifying vision of the phenomenon. There should be an insistence on a unified structural vision in the governance of the different phenomena of human mobility. From this point of view, it seems time for the Church to provide itself with a framework law on the entire phenomenon of human mobility, to avoid individual interventions that give the idea of the fragmentary nature of the interventions regarding a reality, the migratory one, that is fragmented and disjointed. The incorporation of the then Pontifical Council for the pastoral care of migrants and itinerant people into the new dicastery seems to have accentuated the idea that human mobility is one phenomenon among others, with the risk of losing sight of its indispensable need for specific pastoral care. Finally, there is an urgent need to introduce effective strategies to facilitate knowledge of the phenomenon of the human mobility, also through specific teaching in theological faculties and seminaries. From this point of view, the ancient and ever new idea of the topicality of migrations and the inevitable and related juridical pastoral issues that question the Catholicity of our local churches must be taken up again. Maybe the program of a license in global church leadership could be a good answer to this question. Thank you.